Daniel Harper had spent most of his life believing that silence was strength, that keeping your head down, choosing the right moment, and never reacting too quickly was what made a man respected. But that night, standing in the middle of his son's wedding, he realized something he had ignored for years. Silence doesn't always protect dignity. Sometimes it slowly destroys it. It started with a sound, soft, almost unnoticeable. The sound of food hitting the floor. For a second, Daniel thought someone had dropped a plate by accident. But when he turned, he saw something that didn't feel like an accident at all. Lily, his daughter-in-law, standing tall, holding an empty plate, with a faint smile resting on her lips. The food wasn't near her feet by mistake. It was right in front of his wife, Samantha, the woman who had stood beside him for more than 30 years, the woman who had never once asked for more than what they could give. Daniel's eyes moved slowly from the floor to Lily's face, and then Lily spoke. "If you want to stay at this wedding, bend down and eat." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The silence that followed carried them further than any shout ever could. Samantha didn't move. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't look down. Daniel felt something tighten inside his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper. Disbelief. He turned his head. Brian was standing just a few feet away. His son, the boy Daniel had carried on his shoulders, the boy Samantha had stayed awake for, night after night, when he was sick, when he was afraid, when he needed someone. Brian didn't step forward. He didn't say anything. He just looked around, as if the biggest problem in that moment was not what had happened, but who might be watching. "Don't make a scene," Brian said quietly. That sentence hit Daniel harder than anything else, not because it was loud, but because it was familiar. Too familiar. Daniel had said those same words once, long ago. Back, when he thought protecting appearances mattered more than confronting truth. And now, his son stood in front of him, repeating the same mistake. Samantha finally lowered her eyes, not to obey, not to follow the command, but because something inside her had quietly broken. Daniel saw the dress, the same one she had taken out the night before, carefully, gently, like it still mattered. "I don't need a new one," she had said. "This one has memories." Daniel had smiled at that time. But now, those memories were stained, right in front of everyone. Around them, the hall was still full. Music played softly. Glasses clinked. People whispered. Some looked away quickly. Others stared for a moment, then pretended nothing had happened. No one stepped forward. Not one. Daniel slowly bent down, not because of Lily's words, not because of the humiliation, but because Samantha's balance had shifted slightly, and he knew she needed support. The marble floor was cold beneath his hand, sticky, uncomfortable, real. "Don't look down," he whispered softly to Samantha. "Just stay with me." Lily laughed, a quiet, amused laugh. She thought he was obeying. She thought she had control. Daniel didn't correct her. He had learned something long ago. People who believe they have power rarely notice the moment they lose it. He helped Samantha straighten her posture. His hand rested on her shoulder, just firm enough to remind her she wasn't alone. Then he looked around the room again. Perfect suits, perfect smiles, perfect lies. Everything in that hall was built to look flawless. And yet, no one had the courage to say one simple thing. "This is wrong." Daniel checked his watch. 13 minutes earlier, he had walked into this place as just another guest, a father, an old man in a simple suit. Now, something had shifted. Not outside. Inside. Him. He didn't feel the urge to shout. He didn't feel the need to argue. What he felt was clarity. the kind that comes when you finally understand. That silence is no longer an option. Brian stepped closer, still avoiding his mother's eyes. "Dad," he said quietly, "this is my wedding." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know exactly where I am," he replied. And for the first time that night, his voice carried something different. Not anger, not pain, control. He glanced at his watch again. 12 minutes. And this time, he didn't look away. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Because deep down, he already knew this moment wasn't going to be fixed with words. Brian shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the hall again, as if the eyes of strangers mattered more than the silence between him and his own parents. "Maybe it's better if we step outside for a moment," Brian said. It sounded polite, but Daniel understood the real meaning. Not outside for fresh air, outside so no one important would have to see them. Daniel looked at Samantha. Her breathing was uneven now, controlled, but fragile. He gave a small nod, not because he agreed, but because he needed to see how far this would go. They followed Brian through a narrow hallway behind the main hall. The music softened behind thick doors, turning into a distant hum. Each step felt heavier than the last. No one followed them. No one asked if they were okay. It was as if they had already been removed from the story. At the end of the hallway, there was a small table near the kitchen, empty, isolated, deliberate. Daniel noticed it immediately. There were empty seats back in the main hall, plenty of space. But this was a decision. Samantha sat down slowly, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Her eyes fixed on the floor, not the same floor from before, but Daniel knew she was still seeing it. Brian stood in front of them. Lily remained beside him, arms crossed, her expression calm, almost bored. "This will be more comfortable," Lily said. Her tone was soft but sharp enough to cut through anything. "We have important guests tonight. There's a live stream. We just don't want unnecessary situations." Unnecessary. Daniel let that word settle in his mind. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. Samantha adjusted her purse on her lap. Her fingers trembled slightly. Daniel remembered something suddenly. That morning, in the hotel room, she had been cleaning her shoes, carefully wiping every small mark. "This is an important day," she had said. "I want everything to be proper." Daniel swallowed quietly. Brian took a step forward, speaking faster now, like someone trying to finish a difficult conversation before it becomes real. "Everything's already been taken care of," he said. "You don't need to worry about the old place anymore." Daniel's eyes lifted slowly. "The old place?" he repeated. There was a pause, a very small one, but long enough to change everything. Brian exhaled. "We sold the house." The words didn't crash. They didn't explode. They just dropped. Heavy final. Samantha didn't react immediately. She just blinked once, slowly, as if her mind needed a moment to understand what her ears had heard. Daniel didn't ask when. He didn't ask how. He didn't even ask why. Because in that moment, he realized something much more important. The reason didn't matter anymore. "It wasn't really being used," Brian continued quickly, "and we needed the funds. For the wedding, for the future, for everything, for appearances." He didn't say those words, but they were there, clear as anything. Samantha closed her eyes, just for a second, but Daniel saw it. That wasn't just pain. That was something deeper. The loss of a place she believed would always be there. No matter how life changed, a place where memories lived quietly, now gone, without even a conversation. Lily stepped in again. "Everything had already been signed," she said calmly. "It's time for Brian to focus on his own family now." Her words were clean, precise, like a door closing. Daniel nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. Brian relaxed slightly. He thought the conversation was over. He thought it had been accepted. That was his mistake. Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. Once, then again. He didn't take it out. He didn't need to. He already knew who was calling, and more importantly, he knew why. Those calls had started earlier, right when the night began to shift, but Daniel had ignored them, not because he was unsure, but because he wanted to see this moment clearly, without interruption, without distraction. Samantha finally spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Do you remember how we bought that house?" Brian didn't answer. He looked away. Lily didn't speak either. The silence said everything. Samantha nodded slightly, as if she had received her answer. Daniel placed his hand on the cold metal table. He looked down for a moment, then slowly. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. He opened the camera and took a photo. Brian frowned. "What are you doing?" he asked. Daniel didn't look up immediately. "I'm keeping a memory," he said calmly. "Not of the house, not of the wedding, but of this moment. The one where everything became clear." He stood up slowly. His chair made a soft sound against the floor. No one tried to stop him. No one asked him to stay. Samantha looked up at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no blame, just quiet exhaustion. Daniel extended his hand. She took it, carefully, like someone standing up after a long fall. From the main hall, the music grew louder again. A new song had started, light, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. Daniel glanced at his watch. 7 minutes. The second hand moved steadily, unaffected, just like everything else in that room. But Daniel knew things were already in motion, and when the time came, nothing would stay the same. He didn't return to the hall immediately. Instead, he stood near the edge of the kitchen area. The lighting there was softer, the noise distant. Samantha sat quietly behind him. Her breathing had slowed, but the weight of everything still lingered. Daniel felt another vibration in his pocket, then another, faster now, more frequent. Whoever was calling was getting impatient. Daniel finally allowed himself a small breath, not relief, not yet, just readiness, because he knew something no one else in that building understood. This night wasn't over, not even close. He checked his watch one more time. 5 minutes. And this time, a faint, almost invisible shift passed through his expression. Not anger, not revenge, something colder, something final, the kind of calm that only comes right before everything changes. The next few minutes didn't feel long. They felt precise, like everything was moving toward a point that had already been decided. Daniel stood still near the kitchen entrance, his hand resting lightly in his pocket, feeling the steady vibration of his phone. He didn't rush. He didn't check it. He didn't need confirmation. Some things, you just know. Behind him, Samantha sat quietly. Her posture was straighter now, not because the pain was gone, but because something inside her had settled. She wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't hoping for things to fix themselves. And Daniel understood that hope had already done its part. Now it was time for something else. From the main hall, laughter rose again. Music followed. The celebration had resumed. People were smiling, talking, pretending, because that's what people do. When something uncomfortable happens, they move on, quickly, as if ignoring it makes it disappear. Daniel glanced at his watch. 3 minutes. The second hand moved with quiet certainty. Tick, tick, tick. Then, the sound changed. It didn't come from inside the hall. It came from outside. A subtle shift, at first, the kind most people wouldn't notice. But Daniel did. The rhythm of the evening broke, just slightly. The large glass doors at the entrance opened. Cool air slipped inside, and with it, Something else. Attention. The music didn't stop immediately, but it faltered, like someone unsure whether to continue. Guests turned their heads, one by one. Conversations slowed. Phones lowered halfway. Outside, black cars had pulled up. Clean. Silent. No. Unnecessary movement. No noise. They didn't arrive like guests. They arrived like people who didn't need to announce themselves. Daniel didn't move. He didn't step forward. He simply stood and waited. The first man entered, then another, then a few more. Their eyes didn't wander. They scanned the room once, quickly, and then they found him. Daniel, standing exactly where he had been, not hidden, not presented, just there. Something shifted instantly. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, the kind that travels faster than words. The music stopped. Not because someone ordered it, but because someone understood. This wasn't the moment for noise anymore. The hall fell into a strange silence, not empty, not calm, controlled. People stepped back slightly without realizing it. Space opened where there had been none. Brian stood up from the main table. Confusion crossed his face, then concern. He looked toward the entrance, then toward Daniel, trying to connect something that didn't make sense to him yet. Lily followed his gaze. Her expression stayed composed, but her eyes changed, just a little. The certainty that had been there earlier started to slip. She looked toward her father, waiting, expecting reassurance, but he wasn't looking at her. He had already stepped forward, faster than before, more careful, more aware. Daniel watched him approach. They had met before, not at parties, not at family dinners, but in rooms where names weren't always spoken out loud, where decisions carried weight, where silence meant agreement or warning. Lily's father stopped a few steps away, his shoulders lowered slightly. His voice softer now. He said Daniel's name, not loudly, not for the room, just enough. Enough for the people who needed to hear it. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He turned his head slightly, looked back at Samantha. She met his eyes, and for the first time that night, there was no uncertainty in hers, just a quiet, steady strength. She gave a small nod. That was enough. Daniel stepped forward, slowly, measured, not to dominate the room, but to stand where he had always belonged. The people who had entered formed a loose circle, not too close, not too far. No one spoke out of turn. No one interrupted. They didn't need instructions. They understood the order of things. One of them apologized quietly for arriving late. Daniel gave a slight nod. Nothing more. Because no explanation was needed. Room was watching now, not casually, not curiously, but carefully, trying to understand what had just shifted. Brian looked from one face to another, then back to Daniel. His breathing had changed. Slower, but heavier, like someone realizing he had missed something important, something that had always been there, but never noticed. Lily stood still. Her fingers tightened slightly around the fabric of her dress. She wasn't smiling anymore, not fully, not the way she had before. Because for the first time that night, she didn't control the moment. Daniel stepped fully into the open space. He placed his hand lightly on the back of a chair. Grounded, calm, present. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Those who needed to know already did. Those who didn't were beginning to understand. "I came here for my son's wedding," Daniel said quietly. His voice didn't rise, but it carried. "I came with my wife." That was all. No explanation, no performance, just truth. And somehow, that was heavier than anything else he could have said. Lily's father spoke again. Faster this time. Careful. He mentioned projects, investments, timelines. deadlines that suddenly felt uncertain. He spoke like a man trying to steady something that had already started to fall. Daniel listened, without interrupting, without reacting, because he always listened first. When the man finished, Daniel nodded once. "Today is a wedding," he said calmly. "I'm not here for business." A pause, a breath, a moment. Lily exhaled quietly. Relief. Just for a second. She thought the danger had passed, that things would return to normal. Daniel let that feeling exist, just long enough. Then he turned his head, looked directly at Brian. "Do these people look familiar to you?" he asked. Brian swallowed. His voice didn't come out at first, then he shook his head slowly. "No," he said. Daniel nodded. "That's all right," he replied. "Some connections don't need to be recognized until they become unavoidable." The words settled into the room, not loudly, but deeply. Daniel turned back to Samantha. He reached for her hand, held it gently, and in that moment, something shifted again, not outside, inside the room itself. The balance had changed, the smiles were gone, the laughter had disappeared, and what remained was understanding. Daniel glanced at his watch one more time. The minute hand reached its mark. Right, on time. He took a slow breath, and the silence he had carried all evening finally ended. The silence didn't break. It deepened, like the entire room was waiting. Not for noise, but for a decision. Daniel didn't rush. He had never been a man who acted without purpose. Every second that passed now worked in his favor. He looked at Brian again, really looked at him, not as a guest, not as a groom, but as his son. And for the first time that night, Brian didn't look away. There was something in his eyes now, not confidence, not control, something closer to realization. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his suit. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out a small envelope. Simple, clean, prepared long before this moment. He placed it on the nearest table under the soft light. The sound it made was quiet, but final. "This was supposed to be your wedding gift," Daniel said. His voice stayed calm, steady. Brian's shoulders loosened slightly. Relief flickered across his face. Lily noticed it too. Her posture softened, just a little. For a brief moment, they both believed everything could still be fixed, that this would end quietly, that Daniel would choose peace, the way he always had. Daniel picked up the envelope again, opened it, took out the check inside. He held it up, just enough for the moment to be seen, not for attention, but for clarity. Then he folded it, once, slow, deliberate, then again, even slower. The room didn't breathe. No one moved. Daniel placed the folded check back on the table, and then he spoke. "This is no longer appropriate." The words were simple, but they landed harder than anything else that night. Brian's expression changed instantly. The relief disappeared, replaced by something heavier. Lily's fingers tightened around her dress. Her mind was moving now. Fast, calculating, trying to understand how far this shift would go. Daniel didn't look at them right away. Instead, he turned slightly. His gaze met Lily's father. And in that moment, no explanation was needed. "All pending investments," Daniel said calmly, "will be reviewed." He paused, just long enough. "Any unsigned projects will remain on hold." He didn't say canceled. He didn't need to. The difference between those two words was something only a few people in that room truly understood. Lily's father did. Daniel saw it in his eyes. The realization, the weight, the quiet understanding that things had already moved beyond negotiation. Brian took a step forward. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice wasn't steady anymore. Daniel turned back to him. "I'm doing what I should have done earlier," he said, still calm, still controlled. Support only has meaning when it comes with respect. The words didn't rise, but they filled the space completely. Brian opened his mouth, closed it again. For once, he didn't have an answer. Lily stepped forward quickly. "This is our wedding day," she said. There was a trace of urgency now, a trace of something she hadn't shown before. Daniel nodded once. "That's true," he replied, "and because of that, I won't turn this into chaos." His voice didn't change, but the meaning did. "Everything I mentioned will be handled after tonight." He let that settle. Let them breathe. Let them think. Maybe this was the end of it. Then Daniel looked down at Samantha's dress. The stain was still there, dried now, visible, ignored. No one had stepped forward. No one had offered help. Not one person. Daniel lifted his gaze slowly, not to Lily alone, but to the entire room. "That dress," he said, "is the only thing here that cannot be replaced." No one spoke, no one disagreed, because everyone knew it was true. Daniel turned his eyes to Lily, and this time he held them there, not with anger, not with force, but with something far more difficult to ignore. Clarity. "If you want to begin this marriage with respect," he said slowly, "you can make this right." He didn't raise his voice, he didn't point, he simply spoke. "There's water over there." A small decorative fountain stood in the corner of the hall, elegant, unused. Until now. Daniel didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The room understood. This wasn't a command, it was a choice, and somehow that made it heavier. Lily didn't move at first. Her eyes shifted from Daniel to her father, to Brian, searching, looking for support, for direction, for someone to tell her she didn't have to do this. But no one stepped in. Her father looked away. Brian stood still, silent, the same silence he had chosen earlier. Now, it wasn't protecting him. It was leaving her alone. Seconds passed. Long, heavy, unforgiving. Then, slowly, Lily nodded. It was small, barely visible, but enough. She turned, walked toward the fountain. Every step felt louder than it should have. A staff member rushed forward quietly, handed her a cloth, a small bowl of water. No one spoke. No one laughed. No one dared to turn it into something else, because this wasn't humiliation. This was correction. Lily knelt down, carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she dipped the cloth into the water. Daniel didn't step closer. He didn't watch every movement. He didn't need to. This moment wasn't about control. It was about balance, about restoring something that had been broken. Samantha remained still. Daniel stood beside her, not letting her step forward, not making her relive more than she already had. The cloth touched the fabric. Slowly, gently, the stain began to fade. Not completely, but enough. Enough to show effort. Enough to show acknowledgement. Enough to show change. After a few moments, Lily stood up again, her hands lowered, her breathing slightly uneven. She didn't speak. She didn't apologize, but she didn't need to. Daniel looked at the dress, then at her, and gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said. Simple, final. He didn't extend the moment, didn't turn it into something bigger, because the point had already been made. He turned to Brian. "We're leaving," he said quietly. Not a question, not a suggestion, a decision. Brian didn't argue for the first time that night. He couldn't. Daniel reached for Samantha's hand. Her fingers were warmer now, steadier. He held them gently. And together, they turned away. The hall remained silent. No music, no applause, no whispers, just understanding. They walked toward the exit, step by step, unhurried, unstopped. The large glass doors opened again. Cool air met them outside. Fresh, clean, different. And as the doors closed behind them, Daniel didn't look back, because everything that needed to be said had already been said. The air outside felt different, cooler, quieter, like the world hadn't witnessed what just happened inside that hall. Daniel took a slow breath, not to calm himself, but to let the weight of the night finally settle. Beside him, Samantha didn't speak. She just stood there for a moment, holding his hand. Her grip was steady now, not tight, not trembling, just present. They walked toward the car without rushing, step by step, as if there was no longer anything behind them worth hurrying away from. Inside, the city lights moved like nothing had changed. Cars passed. People laughed somewhere in the distance. Life continued. It always does. No matter how heavy one moment feels, the world doesn't stop for it. Samantha leaned back in her seat, her eyes closed briefly, not from exhaustion alone, but from release. After a few seconds, she spoke, softly. The stain came out better than I expected. Daniel looked at her, and, for the first time that night, he allowed himself a small smile. "It wasn't the dress that kept you standing," he said. Samantha opened her eyes. There was something lighter in them now. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace, beginning to return. She nodded slightly, and that was enough. They didn't go back to the hotel immediately. They stayed parked for a while, in silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't forced. It was earned. The kind of silence that comes after truth has been spoken, clearly and completely. The next morning came quietly, like any other day. Daniel woke up early, out of habit. He made coffee, opened the window, let the cool air fill the room. He didn't check his phone right away. He didn't need to, because he already knew things had shifted, not just for him, for everyone involved. When he finally looked at his phone, there were missed calls, messages, more than a few. Brian's name appeared several times. Daniel stared at it for a moment, then placed the phone back. Down. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because some moments need space. Words spoken too soon can undo lessons that are still forming. Later that day, Samantha hung the dress carefully near the window. She didn't hide it in the closet, didn't push it away like something broken. She let it stay in the light. Daniel noticed that, and he understood. Memories don't disappear when they're damaged. They change, and sometimes they become stronger. They made a simple meal that evening. Nothing special, just bread, soup, and tea. But Daniel found himself paying attention to small things. The sound of the spoon against the bowl, the quiet rhythm of the room, the presence of someone who had stood beside him, even when everything else had shifted. After dinner, Samantha looked at him. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought about the hall, the silence, the moment he chose to act. Then he shook his head. "I regret waiting so long," he said. Samantha reached across the table, placed her hand over his. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. In the days that followed, news traveled, quietly. The investments that had been paused stayed that way. Projects slowed, decisions were reconsidered, not out of revenge, but out of balance. Brian called again. More than once. Daniel didn't block him, but he didn't answer immediately either, because some lessons aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be understood over time. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, while sitting on the porch, Daniel watched the sun lower across the sky. Samantha brought out a small plate of homemade pastries. He took one, tasted it. Just sweet enough. Just right. They sat there quietly. No tension. No weight, just calm. After a while, Daniel spoke. "Money can build a beautiful place," he said slowly, "but it can't build respect." Samantha nodded. "And without respect," she added, "nothing really holds." Daniel leaned back slightly, looking at the house, the small garden, the simple life they had built together. And in that moment, he realized something important. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Brian, not to Lily, not to anyone, because the truth had already revealed itself, clearly, completely, and without noise. As evening turned into night, the sky filled with quiet stars, no celebration, no crowd, just stillness. Daniel looked up for a moment, then back at Samantha, and he understood. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about boundaries, about knowing when to stay silent and when to finally speak. Because silence can protect peace. But if held too long, it can also protect disrespect. And once that line is crossed, the only way forward is to draw a new one, clearly, calmly, and without fear. Daniel took a slow breath, the kind that doesn't carry weight anymore. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly where it was supposed to be.